Okay, today we turn to Titus chapter 3. We'll start this chapter today. We've been in chapter 2 for some time. But chapter 3, the first two verses is mainly what we'll look at today. I'd like to welcome you here, the ones that listen on the internet, and we're thankful for all the mothers since this is Mother's Day. And Titus chapter 3 and verse 1, Paul says to Titus, "Put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work, to speak evil of no man, to be no brawlers, but gentle, showing all meekness unto all men." Let's pray. Father, we do thank you for this time, and we're thankful for your love to us and your grace, and for what your Son did for us on Calvary's cross, that he died and was buried and raised again for our sins, that we can be saved by believing the gospel, and we're thankful. And I just pray today, this includes myself as well as all those that listen here, the ones that listen on the internet, that we'll all have a willing heart to receive the Word today and believe what we read, believe what the Word of God says. And I pray that this will help us in this study about our minds and have a proper mindset. And we look forward to the reading of the Scriptures, for we ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Reading these first two verses here, these are tremendous verses to read. And I titled the lesson today, Having a Proper Mindset. And that's what you've got to have, a proper mindset. You've got to have a willing mind. You've got to have a correct mind. When you read the verses and believe what you're reading, and you think about these first two verses, about, on the board I put, believer, there's responsibility when you read these first two verses. You'll find that the sound doctrine is another issue. Ambassadorship, we're ambassadors for Christ, is another thing. Citizenship, good citizens of the United States, that's where we live. So it's important that we're good citizens. And also be subject to. Well, who are we going to be subject to? And that would be the government. That's what we're going to look at in chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. So that's how we're going to break it down. Sound doctrine is very important when you study this, because you look in chapter 1, go back to chapter 1 there in verse 9, and Paul writes to Titus, and he tells him in Titus 1:9, "Holding fast the faithful word as he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers." No way you're going to convince anybody is with sound doctrine. And so Paul writes that sound doctrine opposes false teaching. And also it produces believers who are sound in the faith. You'll find in Titus 2:1, Paul says, "But speak thou the things which become sound doctrine." And you know doctrine is teaching. You want sound doctrine. And speak those things which become sound doctrine. So, thinking about the sound doctrine, that's what believers' life should be made out of. My life should be made out of sound doctrine. What you see in me, my life should be based on sound doctrine. And that's sound doctrine is where the motivation comes. It'll produce good works in us when we put the sound doctrine in us. Because you've got Titus 2:14, Paul says, "Who gave himself for us, that he might redeem us from all iniquity, and purify in himself a peculiar people, zealous of good works." What kind of people are we? We're peculiar. And we looked at that last week, I believe, as zealous of good works. And that's what sound doctrine will do. When you're zealous, you're showing zeal, eagerness of desire to accomplish something. We want to accomplish something. That's good works. Well, what makes us zealous of good works? Sound doctrine. When you put the doctrine in you, it's just like it's burning inside you. It stirs you up. It motivates you to produce and give out and do the good works. And there's several good works, by the way. So Titus 2:15, notice this, "These things speak." What's he talking about, these things speak? He's talking about verse 11, "For the grace of God." Verse 12, what's the grace of God do? Teaching us. So these things speak. Notice that, "and exhort and rebuke with all authority." Now we know what the authority is. It's God's Word. So that's the very important part to look at. The Word of God is what rebukes and exhorts. It is the authority. And saying that, now we're down to chapter 3 there in verse 1, Titus 3:1. Notice what Paul says. Put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. Notice he says, speak the things which become sound. Put them in mind in verse 1 there. That's a mindset, what's going on. He's wanting to put the believers, have a mindset of what's going on. Put them in mind to be subject. He wants them to have a mindset of what's going on to be subject to. Well, who would they be subject to? They'd have to be subject to the government, wherever they're at. Whether it's Rome or wherever they're at, they have to be subject to that. Talking about human government. And being a good citizen. Paul was stressing that to them. Now, here's the thing we see today. There's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of issues goes on today. But the real issue for us as believers, who are we fighting against today? And that's Ephesians chapter 6. Go back over there. I'll remind you of the verse. Ephesians chapter 6, and look at verse 12. This is who our fight's with today. And Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Now that's who our fight's against today. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And you've got to have a proper mindset to do that. I mean, so many are wrapped up fighting flesh and blood. We don't fight flesh and blood because Paul says here, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against power, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in the high place. That's Satan and his bunch. That's what the battle's about today. But yet, Satan wants us to get our minds on fighting the flesh, fighting somebody else, flesh and blood. When you do that, then you get your mind off what you should be doing, and that's what Satan wants you to do. He doesn't want you to have your mind right. He doesn't want you to have a proper mindset. That's why I'm bringing this lesson out today. He wants to get you off what you're doing. And you know about the government. Turn to Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1, and look at verse 16. And we know that there's government here on earth. We know there's government in the heavens because we can read it from the Bible, Colossians 1:16. Colossians 1:16, for by him, that would be Christ, were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth. Notice this, visible and invisible. Whether they be thrones, are there thrones in heaven? There are. Are there thrones here on earth? Yes. There's thrones. You go to every country, you've got somebody sitting on the throne. It's a president, the king, queens, and all that. So you've got thrones, or dominions, or principalities, or powers. All things were created by him and for him. So we know there's the government there. Now, Paul tells us some things about the government. But before I get into that, I'm going to say this to you. My responsibility as a believer is to build a house in my soul. And that house is a house of doctrine. And it starts with Romans, and you can add 1st, 2nd Corinthians, and Galatians with that. You build that house up, and you've got Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians, and you've got the roof on it, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Now that's my responsibility. I've got responsibility to do that. I read the Bible, and I understand that's my job, to build that house of doctrine up in my inner man. So whenever I do that, I take that responsibility and I put the sound doctrine in. I understand that I'm an ambassador for Christ. I also understand by putting that doctrine in me, I should be a good citizen of whatever country I live in, and that's the United States. And also I should be subject to the government. And I read that from those Romans through Thessalonians. But what you've got on the other side, you've got what's called the pastoral epistles. And you've got 1st and 2nd Timothy, you've got Titus, and you've got Philemon. That's the pastoral epistle. Well, think about the pastoral epistles. Here I am, I put the doctrine in my inner man, so I'm come here to this assembly, And just like you, your members here, well, the pastoral epistles tells us how we ought to act and behave and what we ought to practice in the local assembly. That's the pastoral part. You know, you learn that. And that's what Paul is writing in 1, 2 Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. Titus is a pastoral epistle. And you're going to find some interesting things in Titus chapter 3 when we get there. So, what we need to do, let's just use myself as an example, so nobody won't be offended. I should have this doctrine built up in my inner man. Well, if I've got that doctrine built up in my inner man, then I go to the pastoral epistles and I want to practice those in the local assembly. I want to practice that and walk based on who I am in Christ. So I've learned something with the doctrine in me. I've learned about the government. So what have I learned? Well, look what Paul says in 1 Timothy chapter 2. 1 Timothy chapter 2. And 1 Timothy chapter 2, look at verses 1 and 2. What should I do about our local government? How should I walk and deal as far as I'm involved with the local government? I'm here in the United States. We've got the president, vice president, Congress, senators. You've got governors. You've got all that. Well, how should I act? What should I do about our government? Well, look in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 1. I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men. So it doesn't exclude any. All men. So you got to believe what you read. Verse 2, for kings and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceful life in all godliness and honesty. That's how we ought to do. So what should we do about our government? We should pray for our government. That's what we should do. Well, Paul adds more to that. You've got, Paul adds, go back to Titus chapter 3 and we'll read it again. This is just common. It's easy to understand. It's not hard when we look at this. Titus chapter 3 and verse 1, Paul adds more about the government. We pray for the government. That's the first thing. Titus 3:1, put them in mind to be subject to. There's another issue right there. Subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. That's your government. To speak evil of no man, to be no brawlers, but gentle, showing all meekness unto all men. Be subject to. How are you subject to? You obey the government. That's what you do. Well, here's another one. Turn back to Romans. This is your doctrine book. I should have this in my inner man, and I should know about the government in Romans chapter 13. Romans 13. So I should pray for the government. I should be subject to the government. And Romans 13:1, notice this. Romans 13:1. Let every soul, notice that, be subject unto the higher powers. Notice it says soul there. Well, where's your soul at? It's in your inner man. Let every soul. So that tells me something there. I've got to have something in my inner man. Well, what have I got in mind? I should have the house of doctrine in my inner man. We all should. We ought to have that doctrine in our inner man. So let every soul be subject to the higher powers. Well, you think about that. Look and go back to Romans 12:2. Romans 12:2. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind. There's your inner man, that mind. That's what's intent and purpose, that you may prove what is the good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. So Paul in Romans 13, he talks about the government. You can read the chapter and you know that as well as I do. Well, why does he talk about the government? There's a reason there, and you'll miss it if you don't read it. Romans 13:2. Here's why Paul talks about the government. Romans 13:2. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, notice that, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers, notice that, are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise for the same. Now, why did Paul write about the government in verse 3, Romans 13:3? The phrase, notice it says, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Paul writes and tells us about the government because of the evil. That's important right there to see. We're looking at evil. And you know this, we live in a present evil world, Galatians 1:4. Now, it was evil back in Paul's day. It's evil today. It's nothing new. Paul went through far more than we're ever going to go through. But yet, we think we're going through the awfulest time. But again, just bear with me and look at what Paul said. So there's something specific here, the evil, and this specific reason goes back to Genesis chapter 6. You got the whole Bible, that's why you got to read it, and understand there's doctrine throughout the Bible. And Genesis chapter 6, we're going to look about the evil. Why did Paul put the evil there in Romans 13? Because, go back to Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6. And I can tell you, when I read this and renewed my mind in it and got things straight, it helps me. It helps me to live on a daily basis. You look in Genesis chapter 6, and you'll notice that we just skipped some, but verse 5. In Genesis 6:5. And God saw, notice that, God saw, that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. There's the evil. And notice there about his heart, there's the inner man. Man back then in Genesis, they had evil in their inner man, in their heart. And like he says there, every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And you think about the thoughts there. You think about that's what's going on inside of man. And you know as well as I do, you're not perfect. We're just sinners saved by grace. And you know you have thoughts that goes on inside you. You know that, and I do too. We all do. So we understand that, but can you imagine, God saw all this about all of mankind, how wicked they were. And the imaginations. And you think about the dreams, and you think about the lies, that comes from imaginations. And the thoughts, you know, you think about truth should be in our thoughts, but not back then. The truth was not there. They didn't want God. Well, it was a little before that, but their thoughts wasn't right. The imaginations, that's where the lies are created. So what does man do with his imagination? Man lets it become real in his life. That's what he does. When you got darkness in your soul, back then, they had darkness in their soul. Their imaginations were bad. Their thought life was bad. The evil was present. And they didn't want, that's all they had on their mind. Well, look in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 11. Genesis 6:11. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with what? Violence. Now, you need to see that and understand that. There was violence back there before the flood. And the earth was filled with violence. And people go on today, we're in an evil world. I understand that, and I understand there's violence in the world. But there was violence back there in Genesis. And Genesis 6:11, the earth was filled with violence. Well, what was that result of? It was filled with violence. Well, what was the result of that? Genesis 6:5, we'll read it again. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's why there was violence. That's all they had on their mind, evil. And that led to violence. So the earth was full of violence, and it was corrupt. And now look at this. You know what man's number is in the Bible? The number 6. You know what the number of rebellion is? 13. So look in Genesis 6:13. Look at this. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence. Notice that, through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. I mean, their heart's bad, their mind's bad, evil and violence all in the world. Now that's a pretty gloomy picture right there. and yet we want to say how bad we've got it. Well, man's producing violence and destruction. And that's what he was doing in Genesis chapter 6. He's got a bad heart. Now look at this, Genesis chapter 7. Genesis chapter 7, look at verse 21. In Genesis 7:21. And all flesh died. They died because of that flood came. That moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beasts, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man. They died. And you know that. All in whose nostrils was the breath of life, all that was in the dry land died. Now look at verse 23. Genesis 7:23. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven. And they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And that's how bad it was. It was a serious thing. God saw that. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. You think about the results of man's thoughts, imagination, the corruptness, the violence, and all that. Now look in Genesis chapter 8 and verse 20. This is after the flood, Genesis 8:20. In Genesis chapter 8 and verse 20, and Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast, and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil. How far back? From his youth. That's how bad man's evil. People want to talk about evil. It starts in the youth. I mean, you've got to believe what you read there. And I'll read it again. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Well, how old would a youth be? I mean, you think about that yourself and work that out. So that they're evil, even from their youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. You know, that's man's heart is evil from his youth. That's a serious problem. And you think about what did God do with Noah in Genesis 9:1. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth. So, you know, that's a wonderful thing for him to do there. And he did. And look what in verse 5, Genesis 9:5. And surely your blood of your lives will I require, at the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, in verse 6, Genesis 9:6. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. So what did God do? He replenished the earth, but he brought in human government. We know that's capital punishment too. So that's what God did with man. Well, here's the question, and this is a serious question. What if judgment is not exactly correct? And you know, people are always criticizing judgment today. What if it's not correct? Well, here's the thing. Turn to Ecclesiastes. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. And look in chapter 8. Question is, what if judgment is not exactly correct? What if judgment is not executed correctly? I'll get it right. Well, look at Ecclesiastes 8:11. This is a good verse to remember. Ecclesiastes 8:11. Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore, notice what happens. The heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do what? Evil. So that's the problem when you don't have judgment. Like I said, what if judgment is not executed correctly? Well, verse 11 there, therefore the heart of the Son of Men is fully set in them to do evil. They're going to do evil. And we know that by reading the Word of God. That's going to happen. You see that today. So, but yet, we've got a government, and that's what we're leading up to there. So go back to Genesis chapter 9 and look at verse 6. Genesis 9:6, and I'll read this verse again. In Genesis chapter 9 and verse 6, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he him. Now notice that you think about what is God establishing here? Human government. Why? Why did God establish human government back in Genesis chapter 9 there? Man is capable of what? Violence, to do evil. That's why the government was put in place. And that's very important to understand that. God curbs the violence by doing that. And how does he do that? He makes human government. It's an orderly function. And who tells you how fast you can drive? The government does. Who tells you about, nobody wants to pay taxes, you have to pay them, so the government does. There's a lot of things. I mean, you're not allowed to do certain things on the premises, on government buildings and on schools and post office and that type of thing. Who tells you that? The government does. So they do tell us. What's our purpose going to be? Well, I'm going to be subject to it, whether I like it or not. It doesn't matter whether you like it. You've got a government, and you've got to respect it. You've got to be subject to it, is what Paul said. And let me give you this. Go to 2 Peter now. 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter chapter 2. And look at verses 4 and 5. 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. In verse 4, 2 Peter 2:4, Peter says, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them to the chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world. Notice that. Spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. Now what kind of old world was it? It was an evil world. It was full of violence. Their hearts weren't right. Their imaginations were all over the board. And so look in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 5. 2 Peter 3:5. In 3:5, for this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world, that's the old world, that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Notice verse 6, whereby the world that then was. That's the old way of doing it. The old way, just before he brought in the human government, capital punishment, the old way. And you look at the old way, how the world was, ungodly, evil, full of violence. And God had to destroy the world because of it. Well, in verse 7, it says, 2 Peter there in 3:7, or 2 Peter 2:7, 3:7, but the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved in fire against the day of judgment, perdition of ungodly men. Notice there it talks about which are now. That's a new way of doing it. Well, what's a new way? Well, the government was established. You got capital punishment was established. The human government was given. So you got a dividing line with the flood. The flood, before the flood, look how bad it was. Then you got the dividing line with the flood there. And after the flood, the old way, man was corrupted and violence grew. The new world, God instituted human government. Why? To control the violence of man. That's why he put it in for the safety. You think about why did God do that? For the safety. You think about the safety of man. We've all got volition. We've all got will. We make choices. But also you think about marriage. To protect us with our marriage when we marry a husband and wife. When you think about family, when you have children, the government protects you. And that's why he did that, to ordain the government to control the violence of man. What if you didn't have that? You'd be back in Genesis 6 in that day. So I'm trying to get you mindset, have a proper mindset, regardless of what we go through or see. or what we don't like or dislike. I mean, we have speech, okay, freedom of speech, but understand we're still subject to the government. And go back to Romans 13:4. Romans 13:4. Romans 13:4. Notice it says in Romans 13:4, for he, well, who would be the he there? That's the government. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. So for he there, Romans 13:4 is the government. Not the person in office, but the position. Understand that. It's not the person, it's the government. And Romans 13:4, for he is the minister of God to thee for what? Good. That's what Paul tells you. For good there. Well, what's the good for? Why does he put good in there? To control violence. How was it before the flood? It was so bad God had to destroy everybody but those 8 souls. That's how bad it was. Well, look in Romans 13:4 again. For he is the minister of God to thee for good, but if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger. Notice that. That's what the government is, a revenger. Well, who's the ultimate avenger? It's the Lord Jesus Christ. How do we know that? Romans 12. Look at Romans 12:19. Romans chapter 12, and look at verse 19. Romans 12:19. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Bottom line, I mean, the Word of God's true. Man's wrong. So, you think about a revenger. A human government has been given to be the revenger. I mean, that's their responsibility. It's been given to them. We live in this land here, and you see the government, and they have that responsibility. Well, how long are they going to be that way? Man is going to be in that position of authority until the Lord comes at His second coming and sets up the kingdom, and He rules with a rod of iron. Now, that's how long it's going to be. And people, I don't think sometimes understand that. Romans 13:5 says, wherefore, Paul says, wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath. You know, you're subject not only for wrath. You know, if you're not subject, you break the law, you're going to pay for it. You're going to get the wrath. But not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. And that conscience sake, that's your inner man. Understanding deep down inside our inner man. We've got the doctrine in our inner man. And I understand what my place is in the United States. I understand that I'm to be subject to the government. And when the renewed mind is being applied, then I respond with some understanding of the value that God's placed in the government. How do we respond to the world and injustices? How do we respond to injustice? How do we respond to things that are not right? You'll say, well, that's not justice, that's injustice. How do you respond to that? Well, understand this. Here I am, I'm a citizen of the United States. How do I respond to stuff that's injustice? You know what I have to do? I have to remember, based on that doctrine in the house of my soul, well, who am I? I'm an ambassador for Christ. That's who I am. And for conscience sake, inner man, you know, I'm going to be subject to the government. And that's all you can do. I mean, if somebody came in today and they want to shut the building down, what are you going to do? You're going to shut it down. You've got to be subject to it. What are you going to do? You can find you somewhere else to go. You know, meet. That's all you can do. The fighting part, we're not the revenger. The Lord is. And that's what I want you to understand that. You know, what are we doing? What we are doing in the world. Go back to Titus now. I hope this is helping you. It's simplicity for me, and it's helping me. And I need it in my inner man. And I don't want to get frustrated with people. And I don't want to get frustrated and have my mind off what's going on with the government and what's not going on. We have a right. We have a right to vote. You can vote. You have a right to vote people in, vote people out, and all that. But notice what Paul says in Titus chapter 3, and look at verse 1. Put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. Put them in mind. Well, how do you do that? You do it with a renewed mind. You know, why did God create the government? Genesis chapter 6, you go back there and read that. That's why He created the government, chapter 9, when he brought in human government there. He had to do that. He had to change the flow of man. And the thing is, you know, put them in mind, verse Titus 3:1. That's to be a good citizen. That's my goal, to be a good citizen. I can tell you this. I can tell you I was very happy. I'm happy that I served in the military. I'm thankful I did that for the country. If I had it to do over again, I'd do it again. And I'm thankful I did that. And I'm thankful I went and served. Regardless of where you go, where you end up, if you have to fight or you don't fight or whatever, I'm still thankful I want to be a good citizen. I remember back many years ago, a lot of people didn't agree with a lot of things that were going on back in our lifetime. So, you know, be a good citizen, that comes from understanding why God created the government. If you understand that, you'll be a good citizen. You realize, hey, I've got responsibility. Build that house of doctrine to me. It's got to be sound doctrine. I'm an ambassador for Christ. I represent Him. And I want to be a good citizen and be subject to the government. That's what it's saying. And notice it says, Titus 3:1, be subject to. Not rebelling. If you're subject to something, you're not rebelling. Think of that. Not rebelling. Not protesting. You know, people say, I have a right to. You've got freedom of speech. I do too. But my choice today is, I want to make sure I represent the Lord Jesus Christ. That's my choice. That I want to be a good citizen and do what's right. What's my job? I'm an ambassador. My job is, regardless of what goes on and I like it or I don't like it, I want to be a good ambassador. I want to preach the Word. I want to walk by faith. I want to be a good neighbor. I want to give the Word out to the lost and give the truth to the believers. And I want to be the citizen that I should be in the United States. And we're saved to change the government. Well, how are you going to change the government? People always want to talk about changing, make changes, make changes. The only way you can change the government or anybody else is to give the gospel out. They've got to be saved. They've got to hear the gospel, people. I'm not saying there's not saved people in the government. But I'm saying we've got to get the gospel out, give it to the government, give it to anybody you run into, your officers in your county or whatever. But that's how we change it. We preach the gospel that can change the lives of believers. And that's the only way you're going to change people. It's got to be an inner man. If man's heart is on evil from his youth up, Brother Bob, then man's got lots of problems. Why do we get surprised about what's going on today? We shouldn't be. I mean, it's still not like it was in Genesis 6. You think about that. That helps me. What we're doing, we're living in a different society than when I grew up. Well, when did I grow up? Well, I grew up in the 50s and the 60s. And it's completely different. And I cannot expect society to be the same. And yet, I'm caught up sometimes criticizing and saying, well, I wish it was back like it was in the 50s and 60s. It's not going to be that way. Never will be that way. We live in an evil world. So we got to move forward. And the only way I can move forward is take my responsibility, put the sound doctrine in me, be a good ambassador for Christ, be a good citizen, be subject to the government. That's how I move forward. Now that's my opinion. And again, it's grace. You take it for whatever it's worth today and look at it. And I'm not trying to be smart about it. You put the doctrine in you. So Titus 3:1, be ready to every good work. That's our job. And notice it says in Titus 3:2 there, to speak evil of no man. And there's a comma there. And that there is a hard thing to do. To speak evil of no man. That's a good work. you make an impact when you're not speaking evil of people. To be no brawlers there. Well, if you brawl, looks to me like you want to argue. That's somebody that would argue. That's somebody that would want to fight. They're noisy, they brawl. You're not supposed to be a brawler. Why? We're ambassadors for Christ. We represent Him. And it says, notice in verse 2 there, Titus 3:2, but to speak evil of no man, but to be no brawlers, but gentle. That's how I'm supposed to be, gentle. And you think about gentle, you think about kindness, and also in verse 2 there, showing meekness unto all men. That's an internal thing. You know, your power is under control. You got yourself under control. You're meek. And a lot of people say, well, when you're meek, and I've heard people say, well, you might be a grace preacher, you know, you just think that you need to be meek and gentle and all that. Well, the Word says that. I don't make it up. You've got to be that way. And showing meekness unto all men in terms, something that you know and understand. So, you know, what's going on in our lives? We live based on who we are in Christ, put the doctrine in us, preach the Word. That's a proper mindset for me. You know, you can take it for what it's worth today, but that proper mindset and a believer's responsibility. My responsibility, go back, is Titus chapter 2 there in verse 12. This is my responsibility, Titus 2:12. Teaching us. Well, what's teaching us? Verse 11, the grace of God. The grace of God, verse 11, teaches us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, notice it says we should. It didn't say we will, but we should. We should live what? Soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. That's how we ought to live. And that's my focus, that's what my goal is. And I pray that this has been a help to you today.